Are there any places that would be good for people like in Latin America and Central America that are good for people who are retiring, good for people who are earning, like, let's say, less than $100,000? Are there any
Yeah.
countries that you would recommend to look at? With more and more emigration out of Canada and people leaving Western countries, it's my pleasure to announce that I have Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist, with me today. And we're going to be talking about many of these things. His event in Kuala Lumpur is sold out, but you can join the waitlist for it. And that is extremely great news. So, Andrew, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me again.
Good to be back. We're going to have a great time this September. I'm really excited to have you.
I am very excited to be there, and Malaysia has been on my list of places that I've wanted to visit for a long time. I know a lot of people in North America, maybe we can kick that off with that, they don't want to go to Asia. Do you find that a lot in your business? They want to kind of be in Central America, Latin America?
Well, what's interesting is one of the things I've been practicing what I preach on the business side this year is fewer than 20% of our clients in April were Americans, and fewer than a quarter were North Americans. So you include Canadians. We have more people from around the world who are looking for backup plans, but I think everyone, including Americans, is different. We've had some who want to go to Asia. I think the time zone's a big problem for a lot of them, even though we have
Yeah.
a colleague of mine who went to Kuala Lumpur to help me out with some stuff in my house. And he kind of treated it as a mini holiday. And he said, I love it here. Everything's fantastic. He met a girl. He met a great woman.
Oh, wow.
And he said, except for that time zone. So if you're working with Americans, I mean, I was up till 1, 2, 3 in the morning sometimes. So that's the thing that I think deters people. Obviously, you're seeing now in Mexico, they've got this new left-leaning president. I think there's probably some things I could agree with it. I'm never 100% for or against someone. There's a couple things like, hey, let's not rely entirely on the U.S. Like, that sounds like a nice thing. There's a lot of things obviously that aren't so nice. I'll tell you this. We filmed a video called Live Like a King where we showed luxury living in Bogota. We have a couple more coming out. We'll make more. Well, thank you. Everywhere I go in the world, there's somebody who complains, except Malaysia. I don't think we've ever had a Malaysian say anything other than, hey, thanks for coming and talking about this. I can't, and I don't look at all the stuff, but we keep notes on this. I don't think there's been a single time. And so that for me, if you're living in a country, people are at each other's throats, you're not going to understand that until you go there and realize people are just nice.
Yeah, well, I've certainly found that as well, traveling. Like, you go to places like Mexico, you go to places like Colombia, places in Europe as well. It's just not the same. You feel kind of disconnected from this political environment, economic environment, whatever you want to call it, which is happening in the West, where people feel like their standard of living is in decline. One thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, because I know you're a contrarian and you might have a different view to me and to other people on this channel, is what you kind of think of I guess the best way you could call it is like mass migration to places like the UK and Canada, United States. And that also seems to be driving a lot of people away as well.
I'm a believer in immigration. I told Nigel Farage a couple of years ago, he's speaking this year on the topic not of Brexit, but the topic of being canceled. And my suggestion to him a year ago was go and get a bank account in a country where they don't care what your politics are. But he came 2 years ago and I asked him, why can't I move to the UK? I have a business. I would move, I could move a part of my business to the UK, maybe not the whole thing. I could pay some tax. Now they got rid of the non-dom program, so I wouldn't go there now. But, hey, back in 2022, why can't I move, pay a little bit of tax and just come as a productive person to the UK? They have a invest in a startup visa, but a lot of people get rejected. Like, I think almost half. I said, why can't I come? So I'm a believer in that kind of immigration. I'm a believer in some kind of immigration where people who have a hard time and can be productive citizens can come. And I think if you look at a country like the US, hey, maybe some of that violence in Central America is on them for the war on drugs, that kind of thing. Maybe some kind of Marshall Plan thing would be good. But I also believe in following the law. I think people should follow the law. That's one of the things we preach here. And I've been telling crypto people for years, I'm happy to help you go somewhere where you pay zero tax, but don't hide your money and don't think crypto is going to save you. And we're seeing more headlines headlines like that. They're going after people left and right for hiding their crypto. So I'm a big believer in following the law. Therefore, not a big believer in illegal immigration. But I will say this, no matter where I would live, I'd be successful, and, it wouldn't impact me as much. So I guess where I get frustrated is, when you make a video about you're going out for ice cream and someone's comment is, but the illegal alien. Guys, it doesn't have to be your entire thought, like every waking minute. And I worked in talk radio 20 years ago, and I worked when we were talking about this 20 years ago in the US. Everything was illegal immigration. I mean, Terry Anderson, all these guys that I worked with back then, this was our topic. Maybe I'm insulated from that to some extent. And I'm not saying I approve. I'm just saying, when your entire life is devoted to complaining about anything, it could be the World Economic Forum. I don't agree with the stuff they talk about, but I feel like when you take action to protect yourself, that's a good thing. I've been telling people for years that the US and Western countries are heading in the wrong direction, and people laughed. And I think now they're really starting to see it.
This video was powered by ExpressVPN. If you're looking for a VPN and want the best one, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. Using the affiliate link helps support the channel, and you get access to the best VPN and the VPN that I use. Yeah, you were definitely ahead of the curve with that one. And I think, it's just accelerated over the past 4 years, and especially over the past 2 years. Like, the most common conversation that I have with subscribers is people coming to me and saying, where do I go? And I know you probably get that question all the time, and it's extremely nuanced. And I can never answer that question. I'm like, well, it's personal to you. Like, what do you want? Are there any places that would be good for people like in Latin America and Central America that are good for people who are retiring, good for people who are earning, let's say, less than $100,000? Are there any countries that you would recommend to look at?
I think a lot of those countries in Latin America work, because what's nice about Latin America is most of them have income-based residence programs. So unlike Asia, where they generally want you to invest some amount of money, Latin American countries generally say, do you have some kind of income? And it could be as little as $700 or $800. And it could be up to several $1,000s a month. Somebody my parents' age, if you put them together, they might have $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month just in Social Security or some kind of pension. Let alone they could have other investments, dividends, passive income, what have you. And so, even a salary for someone who makes money, some of those countries will just accept, hey, here's deposits into my bank, or they'll even just let you move some small amount of money into their country's banks to prove you have the money. And so that's the benefit. Again, it ranges. Some people are anti-Mexico now. I still think the macro effects for Mexico as an investment, I think long term, are good. It was interesting recently, people were jumping up and down because the stock market went down one day, and then the next 3 days it went up in Mexico. I'm not investing for 4 days. I'm investing for 5, 10, 40 years. Do I want to live in Mexico? Is it going to be quite as appealing with this new president? I don't know if there's a big change from the last president, they say, although they say they're going to make the Constitution worse. But we were all in Mexico during the pandemic at some point. We had events there. It was nice. I think the key in a Latin American country is, can you be the one who floats above what's happening locally? Doug Casey's talked about that. He says when he lived in Argentina, he's just a gringo and they kind of don't bother him. Now, if you're spending more than 6 months in most of those countries, you'll have a tax obligation, or at least you'll be tax resident. Some of them don't tax you. Costa Rica under most circumstances, for example, Nicaragua under many circumstances, Panama, Uruguay has an exemption for effectively 11 years. So, Uruguay, if you're closer to the $100,000, is probably a good place. Panama has long been a popular one. That's not as cheap because it's dollarized. People like Costa Rica. That's a little bohemian. El Salvador is getting attention. I love what the president's doing there. I wish he would come through in more of his promises for residence and citizenship. So I'm not sure that's quite ready. Mexico, I think, has potential. Let's see how things play out. We've had wealthy people who go to Nicaragua. They get left alone there. I'm in Colombia part of the year. If I lived there more than 6 months, I would be taxed at the yin yang, but I'm not, so I don't. Ecuador was one of the best places to retire. Some people say there's rising issues there. I also know some people who still live there. Peru is interesting, but not tax friendly. So, a lot of those places, Argentina is a place they're saying is coming up. Chile, historically, I guess they're going in the wrong direction. That's pretty expensive. So, there's a lot of them. Paraguay has always been kind of the one more right-leaning government that's that's kind of a frontier kind of place. So do you want that? I mean, I probably don't want to live in that long term, much as I would enjoy going temporarily. So, I mean, it's all open. It's what is it, what you want. And I would say the big thing for Latin American countries, it's easy for immigration. It's harder on the tax side. If you're looking to move to one place full time, you've got to consider, where is my income coming from? Is it a pension? Is it Social Security? Is it online where it could be taxed at zero somewhere else? And am I going to live somewhere full time? Or do I want to do my thing where I do the trifecta and I'm in 3 different places 4 months a year? So, I mean, there's just so many questions, but those are the kinds of things I'd be asking you.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of retirees, they want to be in one particular place, whereas younger people, they want to kind of float around. But as you've pointed out on your videos as well, you have to be pretty careful with that, because you could have Canada, for example, still viewing you as a tax resident if you haven't set up any other residency or base anywhere else.
Potentially. And I think where people, and this is not tax advice, where people get in, they're more likely to get in trouble is where they try and squeeze as much juice out of Canada as possible. When I left the United States, the rules are a little bit different in the US than in Canada. But when I left the US, I didn't want to go back. I didn't even want to fly through on a layover. So I didn't. I finally went back for about a week in 2017. I gave up my citizenship later that year. So I am kind of glad I went back to that 1 week. But it was a stressful week, quite frankly, going in and out of there. I didn't want to go back. It's the person who tries to kind of get 132 days. It's like you're really pushing it. So if you're retired and you have a few bucks, Uruguay and Panama might be towards the top of my list. If you're looking for somewhere that has a bit more stability, I think I could handle some places in Mexico. I think I could handle some places in Ecuador. I do spend time in Colombia. You can watch our video, Live Like a King in Bogota, and see. I mean, they have wine stores. They have nice restaurants. They have a lot of nice things there. But that wouldn't be a place necessarily to live full time. That said, potentially some of these countries may have treaties where if your only income is a Social Security check, you may just pay in one or the other. But I think Uruguay and Panama might stand up to me if I had to stay in one place and my goal was safety and stability. And I was just kind of like, hey, make this as easy for me as possible. I don't want adventure.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout, because also as well, when you look at some of the countries like Mexico, for example, is a good example. So many people moved there when the peso, you were getting I think it got up to 23 to $1.
Yeah,
and then it went all the way down, plus inflation. And if you're on a fixed income as well, at least the dollar seems to be a little more stable of a currency compared to some of these other currencies. But then Colombia, as another example, is the opposite way. You're actually increasing your purchasing power if you're earning in dollars.
Although, I mean, the peso in Colombia got as bad as 5,000 to 1, and now it's back to kind of where it's been for a while. It's around that 4,000 to 1 range. But yeah, by the way, the Nomad dad, my father, spends part of his year in Mexico. We're actually having a dinner for some of our clients with the former president of Mexico, Vicente Fox, in a couple of weeks, and he's going to that. And he was telling me, he's like, do I necessarily agree with this new president? No. But he kind of said along the lines of what Doug Casey said. I live in my community. I'm a little bit isolated. I contribute to the local economy. And, I don't think he's as worried about it. I think that's what happens. And I think that because I've done this stuff, my father was motivated. He was always a guy who studied what's happening. I mean, we've been talking for 30 years, including yesterday, the Economic Freedom Index. The U.S. is down to 25th, in part because the rule of law isn't as strong anymore. So we've always talked about this. He's traveled, but he hasn't traveled to some of the more adventurous places until he saw me doing it. And that's what motivated him to go and spend part of his year in Mexico, because he realized, hey, this isn't as bad as I thought. And now
this video was powered by ExpressVPN, helping you protect your privacy with the world's fastest VPN and the VPN that I use. If you want to take advantage of my special offer, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. Let's get back to it.
And now that he's there, it's really not as bad as he thought. And so I think that, what's the phrase? Maybe sunlight is the best disinfectant. I don't know. But he's there and he's seeing it in real life and he's still alive. And he's like, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought. So, for me, the first step is just go somewhere. It's harder to open a bank account in Panama or Uruguay, but I've told people, go to a country and open a bank account. You probably could do that in Ecuador at one of the credit unions. Go and experience the country, open a bank account with $100, and then come back in a year and see that your $100 is still there. And I think being there and seeing your money is still there will show you hey, this isn't entirely different than where you're from.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of the banks in places like Panama are even stronger I would argue, than US banks. Like, they have more legitimate assets and liquidity when you actually compare them, but they don't have the safety of like a deposit compensation scheme, which the US has. But as somebody who's not a resident or a citizen, there are still ways that you can still take advantage of the US banking system and not be in their tax traps.
I mean, yeah, right. So the U.S., again, not tax advice, but the U.S. does not necessarily look at holding bank accounts the same way that other countries might. So people have bank accounts in the U.S. That doesn't necessarily mean they've got a tax liability. So we help people sometimes open bank accounts in the U.S. Sometimes there's a purpose for that, at least from a logistical standpoint. So remember, I mean, my strategy is go where you're treated best. And that means we're going to parcel out every part of your life, and we're going to go where we're treated best for each part of it. You know, what I've said is if you live in Latin America, find somewhere else to bank. We deal, for example, with one of the Spanish banks, which has a big presence in Latin America, but also has a presence in Switzerland. And so you can kind of go interchangeable there, where you get the account in Switzerland for the million plus if you're at that level. And then you can potentially get a referral to open an account locally if you want to do that. But, you know, if I'm moving to Panama, I'm not sure I'm moving all my money to Panama. One of their visa programs does ask for you to move a six-figure sum there. The banks, I would say, are a little difficult to deal with in Panama. You know, I don't know that Latin America, I mean, what's the banking hub for Latin America? It's Miami. So if you want to bank in the U.S., great. That may be an option for some folks who don't, you know, view the U.S. as a risky place to bank. I think there's some risks there. So is Panama inherently totally superior to Canada, the U.S. for safety? You know, I think maybe there's less of the tomfoolery going on. There's more of the, I just don't love the way the banks are managed on a day-to-day basis. But if I'm living in Latin America, I'll keep some money in that country and maybe more in Panama or Uruguay than I would in Peru or Colombia. But I'm going to keep my money in a Singapore, in a Switzerland, in a Liechtenstein, in an Isle of Man, in a Bahamas, wherever.
Yeah, those places I've heard are particularly good, especially Singapore. The banks in there are very boring, which is what you would like to hear when you're banking, actually, as opposed to everything else. What about Argentina? I heard that they announced like a digital nomad visa. I believe it's up to 1 or 2 years, and you don't get to fall into their tax system during that time. With Malay, are you seeing a lot of people asking more about Argentina, moving there?
Yeah, I mean, I have not spent time really at Argentina, and I'm not sure of the digital nomad visa. I did hear something about that. And yes, there are some digital nomad visas. That's always the question to ask. Do I fall into the tax trap with this digital nomad visa? A number of them have said, yeah, come and spend your year and we won't tax you. Sometimes it should be, you should pay tax somewhere else. That's the thing about Ecuador, for example. People say, oh, if I become an Ecuador resident, because that was a big thing, because they have a relatively fast track to citizenship, as does Argentina. And people were saying, oh, I don't have to pay tax in Ecuador. The asterisk generally is, but you should pay tax somewhere else, or else you'll pay, I think it's 10, 11%. And so people sometimes miss those asterisks. That's the one you want to look for, that asterisk with the digital nomad visas. Argentina, I mean, you know, I think it needs time. It's funny that on both sides of the coin, guys in there for how long has he been in office? And people are like, look at this. You know, it's like, give it some time. You know, I mean, everyone in this TikTok era, it's like, what were the results this week? Did your stock go up or go down? Did the currency go up or go down? I mean, the guy's getting in there. He's doing some stuff. He's a bit of a bomb thrower. You know, do you want a guy who's a total bomb thrower? I don't know. Let's see. I've said have a call option. It does not take a large income just to get a regular residence permit. I'm not even sure why you need a digital nomad visa. I mean, I think the residence permit there, they want you to spend some time there. Do you have to be a taxable, you know, tax resident to maintain that? It's a bit more of a fluid situation in a country like that, civil law jurisdiction. But I don't think it's a bad call option. Whether you want to spend time there is up to you. If you don't want to move around, that's fine. If you're traveling around, as I do, it's far. It's down there, right? I mean, Bogota to Madrid, I think I did that in 8 hours recently. You ain't doing that to Argentina, I don't think. No. So that's why I don't spend as much time. But listen, I think I've said it's worth having a call off. Give the guy some time. If you like living there, do that. You know, here's what I've said. We have the event in Kuala Lumpur, Nomad Capitalist Live. Why did I choose to live in Kuala Lumpur as one of my homes? I went to pretty much everywhere in Asia, and I said, where do I feel good? And I chose that place. And I didn't get a scorecard and say, where are the women the most beautiful, or where are the most parties? I just said, where do I feel good? I get into the taxi in Bangkok, I just don't feel it. And if you do feel it, then you should go there. So I think, you know, if Buenos Aires is of interest to you, go and spend some time. I've seen conflicting reports. I've seen people go there, they're like, I couldn't wait to get out. I was so excited, but it sucks. I've seen people say, oh, I love it here. So for me, having more call options is important. You know, I was just in Cairo. If you're really adventurous, you can buy property in Egypt, some of the cheapest property in the world in a big city. They'll give you citizenship. That's like a plan F. But have a plan D or plan B, C, D, E, F. Why not? Where Argentina falls, and that's up to you.
I think that's the best way. I think you also need to be looking at multiple citizenships just in case,
Yeah.
because you just don't know what's going to happen these days, especially with like numerous countries now announcing that they're going to be doing conscription. And I guess what would be some of the easier passports to get, I guess, which are still fairly good in their own right?
I mean, again, define good. Some people we talk to say, I want something that's not Western. So we've had people say, I just want Turkey to be my second passport. I'm going to buy a couple $100,000 of property. You should have done it when I was talking about it 4 years ago, because property prices have gone up in dollar terms since then, and as is the price of the citizenship. So you're probably paying double or more what you would have paid 3 years ago. But, Turkey is a strong passport for everywhere but the West. If you want to go to Europe or the US, it doesn't work. So if you're already Canadian and you're like, hey, I can go to the US without even completing ESTA. I can go to Europe. I want to be able to go to Brazil or Malaysia or wherever else where they don't care where I'm from, as an Easterner or Central, whatever you want to call Turkey. Then that could be an option. The Caribbean citizenship by investment is going to be, $200,000 and up. They doubled that. I've been saying that price is going to go up. There's a bit of a price war 3 or 4 years ago. People thought they were going down. They're centralizing prices at $200,000 and up. But that's a good passport for travel. And they've raised the price in part to stem complaints from Europe.
Right.
Where else can you go? Within Latin America, if you just want to spend time and just wait it out. Where else can you go? Within Latin America, if you just want to spend time and just wait it out. Argentina's fast. They do have, if you're born there, you can't renounce it. I've heard some stories of how if you're naturalized, there's a way to renounce it in case they do something really squirrely. I'm worried a lot less about what Argentina does if I'm their citizen than what the U.S. does. I mean, Argentina doesn't have outposts all over the world. They don't come and crack down on people and do all kinds of nasty stuff. Ecuador's fast. I mean, Mexico could be one that if you do it, correctly, you could do that fast. But if you're going to live in Mexico, that could be a tax issue. So, I mean, those are ones that you can do fast or without having to be there. We're going to be talking in the event about what's called paper residences, where you just wait your time outside of the country. Cyprus, we just announced, they've got a 3-year plan now. If you've got a degree and you have a good job, you can go to Cyprus. Germany shortening their timeline. I mean, that's tax city. Cyprus at least is tax friendly. That's a European Union member state. So, I mean, it depends on what you want. Europe and Latin America being the ones that you're probably going to find, 2, 3, 5-year timelines in. That's about as good as it gets. And then, if you have a multi-million-dollar project somewhere, maybe there's a passport for you there. Or if you have ancestry, first, second, third, sometimes even fourth generation, mostly in Europe, but we've been doing a few in the Caribbean and Latin America also. So if you have, let's say you had a parent who's born in Mexico by accident, like was it Mitt Romney's father, I think, was born in Mexico. They might have been diplomats, it wouldn't count, but if they weren't, then his father's Mexican and he could be Mexican. So, I mean, look through the family tree, look at would I live somewhere else? Would I get a paper residence? Would I make a donation? Or would I buy real estate or make an investment in a country like a Turkey or an Egypt? I mean, there's a lot of ways to go with it.
Yeah, that is true. And I think the ancestry one is a really interesting option for a lot of people, because especially in Canada and the United States, you've got a lot of ancestry from places like the UK, Ireland, Italy, all these different places, which mentioned previously in other videos that they have good ancestry programs. I think Italy is one of them. I might be wrong.
So the UK is tough. The UK has rare conditions for what's called double descent through grandparents. Generally, it's a parent's one. The UK is not that easy. And obviously, the UK is not as interesting of a passport anymore because British and Irish citizens can live in each other's country through the Common Travel Agreement, but you can't live in the EU otherwise. Ireland is arguably a pretty good one to have. You can only go back to your grandparents in pretty much every case I've seen. So that's only 2 generations. So, all the Irish folks I knew growing up in Cleveland were more than that many generations detached. But that's a great passport because you can live in the UK as well. I think what you want is options. I mean, people say, oh, the EU is falling apart. Number one, the EU, at least yet, is not taxing people no matter where they live. The US does that. Canada, you've heard the guys like Jagmeet Singh say they should do that. I think Europe understands there are other countries out there and it's okay to leave. Could the EU at some point do something nasty and say you must pay X amount of tax no matter where you live? Sure. But I would guess that they would have to say, if you live in another EU member state, then you're okay. And you might have a country like a Cyprus or a Malta that has a non-dom program. So even if you could become Polish or Slovak or Italian or Lithuanian through your family tree, pay no mind to the fact that you may not like that country. Number one, maybe you feel connected to your ancestry. That's a nice thing to feel. But number two, you could be a Lithuanian who chooses to go and live in Malta. And sure, they have taxes in Malta, but they also have a non-dom program. And that means that most of your foreign income could be exempt except for what you spend in Malta. So, as much as I think having an EU passport alone is not ideal, and the EU might get worse, I don't see that on the immediate time horizon. And I imagine there'd be ways to work around that and pay some lower rate of tax. Listen, I talk a lot about tax. You are the person who makes $100,000. Sure, pay something. I paid more tax last year than I have in the past. But you know what? I look at the tax I paid as a user fee. I gained access and I paid a fee. If it was pay us 50% of everything that you and all of your companies earned at the level that, anyone running a successful business is at, that's not worth it. I mean, there is no country worth paying $5 million a year to live in unless you just are sentimental. But to me, that can be replicated. Pay something. Happy to have people pay something. But I think what you want is options where they're not going to bleed you dry.
Yeah. And I think when you look around the world now as well, and you look at different places, you're like, where are my tax money going? Especially when you go to some of these lower tax jurisdictions. They don't have to be zero tax, but you're just like, I'm going to be paying 30-50% in the United States or Canada tax, and the healthcare isn't there in the United States. The healthcare is really bad in Canada. So why are you paying all this money when you could go to a place like Malaysia, where I've heard healthcare services are one of the most cost effective and best services that you can get in the world?
If you are a libertarian, if you are a free marketeer, to me, there's the actual hard issues where, hey, the United States has a constitution. They don't follow it, increasingly so, but it's written down somewhere. You have certain rights or they have to do something or whatever. And then there's the soft things. A country like Malaysia, to me, it's a soft touch. And, if you're a libertarian, if you're a free marketeer, and you just kind of want to be left alone and you want to keep more of your own money, Malaysia's tax system is pretty friendly. Depending on what you do, you might pay a little bit of tax, but you're not going to pay on most of your income. They just renewed that through 2026. And then you can go to Prince Court Medical Center, for example, and you can get what did I pay? $231, I think, for the 4-hour, soup to nuts. You're over 40 now, which I'm not, but I figured I'm close enough. They check everything. They do an ultrasound. I mean, you can go to their website and look it up. I don't get paid by them to mention Prince Court. They're coming to our event because I believe in what they do. $231, I think, when you pay with a MasterCard, and they rush you to the front of every line. You're in and out. The doctor lived in the UK for 10 years. They studied there. So, I mean, to me, that's pretty free market. You keep most of your tax money, if not all of it. And then when you need services, you go and pay a business that has put together people that actually have quality, that have gone to good universities. I think if you've studied locally in Asia, you can't get a job at that hospital. I think they want people who've studied in the UK. I mean, you can kind of create your own libertarian world by going to these places where there's little pockets of, hey, and by the way, Malaysians pay less taxes than Canadians or Americans. They think when I say I pay $231, they come on the video to say you got ripped off. We pay 1 ringgit. We pay 23 cents. And so somehow they managed to do it where people aren't as much at each other's throat, even though they've got a multicultural society. The economic standards are approaching those of some of the newer European Union member states. Kuala Lumpur, quite frankly, is in the places that I go, not much worse than Singapore. Not quite as good, but not much worse. I don't get the value proposition anymore, other than when I go to the store, I always drink Coca-Cola. I don't try that new brand of cola. I don't know. Is that any good? I don't know. That's what Canada and the U.S. have got. Don't try the new cola.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And I think, I've been looking and booking different things, and we booked a business class flight from Kuala Lumpur to Langkawi. And for that flight, it was 300. It was less than that. It was around $280. Now, for the same flight, an hour to Vancouver in Canada from Calgary, similar distances, you're talking like $1,000. So, and the service is probably going to be way better in Malaysia versus in Canada. So I can really see the difference in prices, especially looking at accommodations and different things in Malaysia is very, very interesting, very cheap and affordable. This video was powered by ExpressVPN. If you're looking for a VPN and want the best one, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. Using the affiliate link helps support the channel, and you get access to the best VPN and the VPN that I use.
I'm going to Langkawi also. I'm flying Malaysian Airlines. And yes, I mean, Malaysians are some of the most lovely people in the world. And I left the U.S. It wasn't my cup of tea, but I think people were probably a little more civil back then. Now it just sounds like it's become bedlam. I mean, you fly, order the teteric, like this sugary tea. I mean, they bring it with the smile. Some of the nicest. And I think I must have paid like $100 to fly business class. I mean, it's an hour or less, but I mean, they've got a nice lounge, like everything works. Like they actually believe in service there in these countries. And then, yeah, like I'll tell you one hotel I like to go to, Eastern and Oriental Hotel, the E&O in Penang. You get a car, you get a big, beautiful van. Like we're sending them for the VIPs. It's like $200. They come to your house. It's a 4-hour drive. They take you up to the E&O and you pay $200 a night for an ocean view suite in this colonial wing where there's a free happy hour with wine. They put a bottle of vodka and gin if you're in your room. There's a free breakfast, like it just ekes cool. And then you go, to the Western world. Where was I? I was in Milan and I spent like $3,000 a night and like no one says hello to you. And it's just like, what the hell am I doing here? And again, if you have never thought of anywhere but Milan, you're like, hey, okay, well, that's the price of admission. But if you can go to the E&O and spend $200 a night and have a view of the ocean on your private balcony, what are we doing? But again, it's not like, oh, nothing works or something. I do drink tap water in Malaysia. I got a filter just to make it better. But I mean, you can. I don't know. You do judge for yourself. But I don't know how it's so much worse. The service is better. Tell me what's worse other than this. Our event works in Kuala Lumpur because everyone knows I've been talking about it for a decade. The average person does not think it's a sexy place to go. I never cared. Like I don't go to Portofino. I don't go to, the Courchevel in the winter. What? To hang out with a bunch of influencers? I don't need that. If you need sex appeal and to brag, it won't work for you. Any other way, it will work for you. And I think probably that's what some people in North America are hanging on to. The only thing they kind of feel like they've got, 80% of Americans now say fast food's a luxury. So the one thing you can hang on to is the legacy arrogance of your nationality and saying, hey, well, everyone's still trying to come here. I was talking to my dad yesterday. He's like, I don't think many Mexicans are trying to go to the U.S. anymore. In fact, Mexicans are coming back, right? So, okay, people are coming in through the southern border. Sure, there's always somewhere people are trying to go from. I mean, you know what? If people were dropping bombs on your country, you'd probably want to go somewhere too. I'm not defending, what's necessarily happening. But the idea, like, well, they're all coming here. Okay, like they're also going to other places. They're going to Malaysia. I met a guy. We took him out a couple of years ago. He's from Iraq, and they were giving him a hard time in Iraq, and so he came to Malaysia. Malaysia welcomed him. He doesn't want to go to the U.S. He told me, he's like, I don't want to go there. I'd rather be here in Malaysia. So there's people moving everywhere, right? The difference is you and I, who have some money and who have some talent, we're leaving at record numbers. That's what should matter.
Yeah, big time. And it doesn't matter. You just feel like another number. And I think when you even look around, like a lot of people will say, I don't want to leave because it's not safe or this and that. And then when you look at the safety aspect in these other countries, you're like, what are you talking about? I mean, Mexico is a prime example. Every time I've said to people back in the UK, I'm going to Mexico, they've been like, wow, you're going to get shot or murdered. And I'm like, not really. You see more police in Mexico. And that is one thing which the president who was just in actually did a good job with. I mean, sometimes they do good and bad jobs, but he did crack down on the police corruption, and the safety aspect got a lot better in places like Cabo, for instance, where there was cartel wars going on.
I'll just add to that. I mean, I think Latin America, because you mentioned it earlier, is one of the less safe places for violent crime. I think the U.S. is in the bottom third for violent crime, if I recall correctly. Again, I get it. Like, if you're from the United States, there's like, they don't report the numbers correctly down there because, the U.S. isn't corrupt. It cost $1 billion. No, I think they were saying it might cost $2 billion now to be elected president, but there's no corruption. Nothing's done wrong. I mean, all the numbers are perfectly kept. We can always find a reason why the other place is bad and our place is great. It's a defense mechanism. And I'm saying it from love because I want people to experience the greater peace and comfort and financial, largesse that I've been able to experience by doing this. I've done this and I've been, I guess, the canary in the coal mine. But, Latin America is not the safest place. But that said, when I film Live Like a King in Bogota and people say, oh, it's not safe, it's safe for me because of the way I live and the area I live in and just everything that I do. And what I say is, I'm talking to a friend of mine later today who lives in Naperville, Illinois. He doesn't go to Chicago. He doesn't go to the neighborhoods with problems. He lives in his safe little, compound in Naperville, Illinois. So you can say all you want how Chicago's unsafe, but guess what? If that guy's leaving the United States, he's going to find a Naperville of wherever he goes. And, the idea that and then people get like, oh, well, this guy with his living in his rich community. Yeah, listen, wherever I go, I'm going to live in a safe, comfortable place. It's cheaper to do that in many of these places than it would be in the U.S. I mean, you can go to Colombia and you can spend under $200,000 and get a nice apartment in a big city. You could get a nicer house outside of the city. But if you want to be in a city in a relatively safe area, okay, maybe in Colombia or Latin America, you don't walk around with a lot of bling. And they do tell me, don't wear your watch. I do sometimes. Maybe the killers are watching this. Do you have any robbers in Colombia watching your channel? I'll be careful. I'll be careful next time I'm there. But I just, and by the way, in the past, I mean, years ago when I first went there, I went out with some girls. Nobody drugged me. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm just lucky. But I think that you can recreate the life you have where you're at somewhere else. I think that Naperville, the normalcy bias is it's entirely safe, but actually there's other places that are more safe. Latin America being more violent than other parts of the world, Eastern Europe, the Gulf, and much of Asia being some of the safest places in the world.
So you've got the choice to go wherever for whatever you want. And again, it is a personalized decision. So it's always definitely very hard to answer the question of where should I move to? Is there any words of wisdom, I'm sure there is, that you want to leave us with here today?
Well, I always tell people, look for more ways to go where you're treated best. This is something that we all struggle with in some area. It doesn't have to be about taxes. It doesn't have to be about, where do you invest? What are ways, even in your relationships? How do you go where you're treated best? And I think that's where some of this stuff stems from. I lived in the United States. I think in some ways the United States is like being in an abusive relationship. Even when you want to leave, they manipulate you and they try and drag you back and they try and beat you up and they try and take advantage. You wouldn't stay in an abusive relationship just because you have history or just because you call it loyalty. That's what a person who really needs help would do, is say, hey, don't leave this abusive relationship because you have to be loyal. They were there for you. That's sick. And so I think if you look at ways to go where you're treated best and you look at things like relationships, where do I go where I'm celebrated? Where do I go where they treat me the best? And that's going to be different things. Just like you have different kinds of relationships. You have a love relationship, you have friendships, you have business relationships. How do I carve up what I'm doing geographically to make sure, hey, banking in the US, to your point, one bank in the top 50, I think, a couple in the top 100 safest banks in the world in the US. Why not bank in Singapore if you can? Live in the US if you want, but for that one part, where do I go where I'm treated best? My banks aren't best, where is best? And I think if you look at that in that way, you'll be happier and you'll be more successful.
Yeah, I think that's very wise words right there. Just real quick, where should people go if they want to learn more about your upcoming event? There might be some spaces that are opening up, I hear.
Well, it's nomadcapitalist.com/live. The event's sold out. We've got about 750 guests plus a number of speakers. We will be monitoring. If you go to the website, you can get on the waiting list. Worst case scenario, you're on the waiting list to be notified first in 2025. We sold out in about 14 days. And so next year, you'll have the chance to come in. Every year, we move onward and upward.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Andrew. It was a pleasure having you on. Everybody,
Always.
Check out Nomad Capitalist Live. If you want to watch another interview that I did with Andrew Henderson that was extremely popular, click this video banner right here. And if you're looking for a VPN to get around all the censorship, check out the link in the pinned comment, expressvpn.com/marketmania. I will see you in the next one. Take care.